Everyone knows Elvis Presley gave away Cadillacs. He handed out the keys to friends, family, and sometimes total strangers. That part is history. It's on record. We also know he was a major force behind the creation of St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis. He gave his yacht, the Potomac, to the hospital to be sold for funds. He performed benefit concerts. These are the public acts of a generous man, the things his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, could use for good press. But what about the other stories? The ones whispered in Memphis diners and Las Vegas lounges for decades. The stories that have no paper trail, no photographs, no official confirmation. They suggest a different kind of giving. A secret, almost compulsive generosity that happened far from the cameras. They paint a picture of a man who, despite the gold jumpsuits and the blinding fame, never forgot what it was like to have nothing. He knew the shame of poverty. He remembered his mother, Gladys, working tirelessly for pennies. And maybe, just maybe, he spent a good part of his life trying to quietly erase that same struggle for others, one person at a time. These are the unconfirmed legends, the folklore of the king's kindness. There are no documents to prove them. There are no signed checks in a museum. All we have are stories passed down, third-hand accounts, and a pattern of behavior that makes them feel impossibly true. Are they just myths? Or are they glimpses into the real heart of a man hidden behind the legend? Number 17. Did he secretly fund a wing of a veterans hospital? There's a story that goes around Memphis, a quiet one. It says Elvis Presley paid for an entire physical therapy wing at a local veterans hospital in the late 1960s. No plaque, no press release, just an anonymous check that covered the construction, the equipment, everything. It's a story told without proof, but it fits the man. Elvis's time in the Army from 1958 to 1960 was a defining period of his life. It was where he met Priscilla Beaulieu. It was where he lost his beloved mother, Gladys, the grief of which haunted him forever. But it was also a place where he was just Sergeant Presley. He followed orders. He drove a Jeep. He did his duty. He seemed to genuinely respect the structure and the sacrifice of military life. His friend Jerry Schilling, in his book Me and a Guy Named Elvis, talks about how the Army gave Elvis a sense of normalcy he had lost to fame. It grounded him. The most famous example of his support for the military is, of course, the USS Arizona Memorial benefit concert. On March 25, 1961, after years away from live performing, Elvis put on a show in Hawaii. The memorial was in desperate need of funds to be completed. The concert, his first in front of a live audience since 1957, raised over $64,000. That's more than $500,000 in today's money. It was a massive success and played a crucial role in getting the memorial built. This act is well documented, it was public, it was good for his image after years of making movies. But the hospital wing story is different. It's private. The rumor suggests the donation happened around 1968 or 1969. This was a time when Elvis was deep into his Hollywood movie contracts, a period many, including Elvis himself, felt was creatively stifling. He was looking for something more meaningful. It was also a time when the Vietnam War was raging, and returning veterans were not always welcomed home as heroes. The idea that Elvis, a veteran himself, would see a need and fill it without fanfare makes a certain kind of sense. Why would he do it secretly? One reason could be Colonel Tom Parker. The colonel would have wanted to turn such a donation into a massive press event. Photographers, reporters, a big ceremony. Elvis often bristled under the colonel's constant need for publicity. An anonymous donation would have been an act of pure charity, an act that was his and his alone, with no angle to it. It would be a rebellion against his own fame. The Kennedy Veterans Hospital in Memphis would have been the likely recipient. It was the main facility for veterans in the region. But hospital records from that era are notoriously difficult to track, and a truly anonymous donation, perhaps made through a third-party lawyer, would leave almost no trace. The story survives only in the memories of a few retired hospital staff and their families, a piece of local lore. It's one of those things people in Memphis just know, even if they can't prove it. If it happened, it's a profound statement. It's one thing to do a big public show. It's another thing entirely to write a check that would change the lives of thousands of injured servicemen and demand absolutely no credit for it. It points to a man who understood service and sacrifice on a level that went beyond a photo opportunity. But without a receipt, a letter, or a single witness willing to go on the record, what are we left with? Could the hospital's financial records from that era, if they even still exist in some dusty archive, hold a clue? Did a lawyer in Memphis, whose name is now lost to time, handle a massive anonymous transaction in the late 60s? And if the story is true, how many veterans received care in a facility paid for by the king without ever knowing it? Number 16, was there a secret fund for struggling musicians in Memphis? Memphis was Elvis's town. It's where he found his sound, blending the blues of Beale Street with the gospel he heard in church and the country music on the radio. He came from the city's raw creative soil, and a persistent rumor says he never stopped paying back the community that made him. The story goes that Elvis quietly maintained an informal fund managed by a trusted associate, specifically to help Memphis musicians who had fallen on hard times. This wasn't about a record deal or a big break. It was more fundamental. It was about paying a hospital bill for a bluesman who couldn't afford it. It was about covering the rent for a guitarist whose gigs had dried up. It was about buying a new instrument for someone whose only source of income had been stolen. The fund was supposedly managed with absolute discretion. A musician in need would get a visit. An envelope of cash would appear. The message was simple. This is from a friend. Get back on your feet. The context for this makes perfect sense. Elvis came from nothing. His family lived in public housing at Lauderdale Courts. He knew what it was like to be a struggling artist. He worked as a truck driver for Crown Electric before Sam Phillips at Sun Records gave him a chance. Peter Guralnick's definitive biography, Last Train to Memphis, paints a vivid picture of a young, hungry Elvis soaking in the city's music scene. He revered the older blues artists and musicians he saw on Beale Street. He understood that incredible talent didn't always translate to financial security. Many of the original blues and rockabilly pioneers who inspired him never achieved lasting fame or fortune. By the 1960s and 70s, while Elvis was a global superstar living at Graceland, some of his own heroes were struggling. Think of artists like Arthur Big Boy Crudup, who wrote That's All Right, Elvis's first single. Crudup fought for royalty payments for years and died in relative poverty in 1974. Elvis reportedly felt a great deal of guilt over these kinds of inequities in the music business. The fund, if it existed, would have been his way of correcting that imbalance on a personal, local level. It wouldn't have been a formal charity. It would have been more like a personal slush fund for good deeds. The manager of this fund is a key part of the legend. Some versions of the story point to George Klein, the DJ and lifelong friend of Elvis. Klein knew everyone in the Memphis music scene. He would have known who was really struggling, who was too proud to ask for help, and how to approach them without causing embarrassment. Others suggest it might have been Alan Fortas, a member of Elvis's entourage known for his down-to-earth connections to the city. There are no account ledgers for this fund. There are no canceled checks made out to struggling musician. The evidence is purely anecdotal, a story from a grandchild of a session player. A vague memory from a bartender who saw one of Elvis's guys slip a man an envelope. It's all hearsay, but it aligns perfectly with Elvis's known habit of spontaneous cash-based giving. He was known to carry huge wads of cash. If he saw someone admiring a piece of jewelry in a shop window, he'd walk in and buy it for them. Giving cash was his default mode of solving problems. A secret fund is just a more organized version of that impulse. It's a way to direct that generosity to the people and the art form that gave him his start. He was protecting the roots of his own success. It was a tribute to the city and the sound that created him, done in the most direct and Elvis-like way imaginable, with a quiet handshake and a thick envelope of cash. So did one of Elvis's inner circle act as a secret angel, distributing the king's money around the Memphis music scene? If the fund existed, how many musicians did it save from giving up? And how many classic Memphis songs were created by artists who were able to keep going because of a gift from a man they likely never even met? Number 15, did he anonymously pay off the mortgages of strangers? The story of Elvis buying Cadillacs is famous, but there's a deeper, more impactful version of this legend. It's the whisper that he didn't just give away cars, he gave away homes. The rumor is that Elvis, on multiple occasions, would read a story in the Memphis Commercial Appeal about a family facing foreclosure or some other hardship, and would instruct one of his associates to anonymously pay off their mortgage in full. Imagine the scene. A family is on the brink of losing everything. They've been served an eviction notice. They have no options left. Then a lawyer calls, or a letter arrives from the bank. It says their mortgage has been paid. in full, no explanation given, just a zero balance. The relief would be life-altering, the mystery would be profound. This story is a powerful one because it speaks directly to Elvis's own childhood trauma. His family was constantly on the move, struggling to make rent. His father, Vernon, was even sent to prison for check fraud over a matter of a few dollars, a desperate attempt to keep the family afloat. The fear of homelessness was a real and present danger for the Presleys. The book Elvis and Gladys by Elaine Dundee details the extreme poverty of their early years in Tupelo and Memphis. For Elvis, a house wasn't just a building, it was security, a symbol of everything his family never had. In Graceland was the ultimate expression of this, a fortress against the poverty he escaped. So, the idea that he would use his wealth to give that same security to a complete stranger is incredibly compelling. It's a direct response to his own past. Unlike a car, which is a luxury, a home is a fundamental need. This kind of giving is more personal, more significant. The mechanism for this would have had to be discreet. Elvis couldn't just walk into a bank and pay off someone's loan. The press would have been all over it. The family would be hounded, the act would lose its purity. Instead, the legend suggests he would use his lawyers or business managers. He'd hand them a newspaper clipping and say, "Take care of this, and make sure they never know it was me." The money would be transferred through a trust or a corporate account, making it untraceable back to Elvis Presley Enterprises. While there is no single verified case to point to, there are many documented instances of his smaller-scale generosity that make the mortgage story plausible. He was known to pay for people's medical bills. He would cover funeral expenses. He once bought a house for his maid, Mary Jenkins, but that was for someone he knew. The power of the mortgage legend is that it was for complete strangers, people he connected with only through a brief, sad story in a newspaper. This type of philanthropy is also consistent with his character in another way, his growing isolation. In the 1970s, Elvis was increasingly cut off from the real world, living a nocturnal life inside the walls of Graceland. Reading the local paper might have been one of his few connections to the everyday struggles of ordinary people in his city. It was a way for him to reach out from his gilded cage and make a tangible difference, to feel connected to the world he could no longer walk through freely. The story persists because it feels right. It's a modern-day fairy tale, a benevolent king reading of his subjects' troubles and dispatching a secret agent to solve their problems with a bag of gold. It's the ultimate fantasy for anyone struggling to get by. But is it more than a fantasy? Are there families in Memphis today living in homes that have been passed down through generations who have no idea their security was a gift from the most famous man in the world? Could a deep dive into bank archives or legal records from the 60s and 70s uncover a pattern of mysterious third-party mortgage payoffs? Or is this just a beautiful story we want to believe about a man whose life was often more complicated than the legend? Number 14, was he the secret benefactor of a small-town library? This story is one of the more unusual ones. It doesn't involve cars or cash handouts. It's about books. The legend says that in the mid-1960s, Elvis read a short article about a small rural library near Tupelo, Mississippi, his birthplace, that was on the verge of closing. Its collection was outdated, the building was falling apart, and it lacked the funds to continue operating. Supposedly, Elvis, without any fanfare, arranged for a donation large enough to build a new children's wing and restock the entire library with new books. The donation was, of course, anonymous. The library board was told it came from a Mississippi-born businessman who wishes to support childhood literacy. No one ever knew the benefactor was the king of rock and roll. This story seems out of character at first glance. Elvis was not known as a great reader of literature. His personal library at Graceland was filled mostly with spiritual and religious books, numerology, and martial arts manuals. But the key to this story isn't Elvis the reader, it's Elvis the son. His mother, Gladys, had a 4th grade education. She worked incredibly hard her whole life in low-wage jobs. She always wanted more for her son, and like many parents of her generation, she saw education as the primary way out of poverty. In Peter Guralnick's writing, Gladys is the emotional core of Elvis's life. Her hopes and fears became his. A library, especially a children's wing, is a symbol of that hope. It's a place that gives kids from poor backgrounds a chance she never had. Funding a library in the area where he was born would have been a deeply personal tribute to his mother's memory. Gladys died in 1958, and Elvis never truly got over her loss. Many of his later acts of charity can be seen through the lens of honoring her. The timing of this rumored donation, the mid-60s, is also significant. Elvis was deep in his movie career, churning out formulaic films. He was often bored and felt like he wasn't doing anything important. An act of quiet, meaningful philanthropy like this would have been a powerful antidote to the hollowness of Hollywood. It would be something real and lasting. Furthermore, the focus on Mississippi is crucial. While Memphis was his home, Tupelo was his birthplace. It's where the two-room shotgun shack he was born in still stands. He maintained a connection to the place, donating to a youth center there in the 1950s. The idea that he would later do something for the wider community, something focused on education, is not a huge leap. The anonymity is, again, the defining feature. By this point, any public donation by Elvis would become a circus. Naming the Elvis Presley Children's Wing would have involved the Colonel, contracts, and press conferences. It would have become part of the business of being Elvis. An anonymous gift would be purely about the act itself. It would be a simple, beautiful thing, untainted by fame. It was a way for Elvis Aaron Presley, the boy from Tupelo, to do something good, not Elvis the superstar. The trail for this story is colder than most. A small-town library's records from 50 years ago are unlikely to have survived, and even if they did, they would only list the anonymous benefactor. The story is kept alive by local historians and longtime residents who swear it's true. They point to the sudden, unexplained windfall the library received, and the fact that the new wing was built with a quality of materials that seemed beyond any normal local donation. So, what is the truth? Is there a library in a small Mississippi town that owes its existence to the king? Did he give kids from his hometown the educational start he and his mother never had? And could a clue still be hidden in the minutes of a long-forgotten library board meeting, a note about a mysterious benefactor who changed their town forever? Number 13, did he fund an inner-city martial arts dojo? Elvis's passion for martial arts was not a casual hobby. It was a deep, lifelong spiritual and physical discipline. He started training in 1958 while in the Army and eventually earned an 8th degree black belt in Kenpo Karate. He saw it as a way to find focus, control, and a sense of inner peace that was otherwise absent from his chaotic life. A persistent and fascinating rumor claims that he took this passion and turned it into an act of secret charity. He allegedly funded the entire operation of a martial arts dojo for underprivileged kids in a rough part of Memphis. The story goes that in the early 1970s, Elvis was working with his longtime instructor, the renowned Master King Ree. He saw how martial arts training gave kids discipline, self-respect, and a positive outlet things desperately needed in neighborhoods struggling with poverty and crime. According to the legend, Elvis told Master Ree to find a suitable location, set up a school, and not to worry about the cost. He would cover the rent, the equipment, the uniforms, and even a salary for the instructor, with one condition: his name was never to be attached to it. This was not about training future champions. It was about saving kids. It was about giving them a safe place to go after school, a place where they could build character and learn to defend themselves, not with aggression, but with confidence. This rumor is supported by everything we know about Elvis and karate. He was a true evangelist for the art, and members of his entourage, the Memphis Mafia, were all required to train. He incorporated karate moves into his live performances, making those famous chops and stances an iconic part of his 1970s stage persona. His personal karate master, Ed Parker, was a close friend and spiritual guide. In the book Elvis and the Memphis Mafia by Alana Nash, his friends talk endlessly about how seriously he took his training. It wasn't a joke to him, it was a way of life. Funding a dojo would be a natural extension of this passion. It combined his love for martial arts with his well-established generosity and his concern for the underdog. He saw what it did for him, a man who had everything, and it's plausible he wanted to see what it could do for kids who had nothing. The location of this supposed dojo is always vague in the telling of the story. Somewhere in North Memphis or down near the projects. This lack of specificity makes it hard to verify, but it also makes sense. If the goal was to keep it a secret, a nondescript location in a part of town that reporters would never visit would be ideal. The funding would have been handled in cash delivered by one of his guys, leaving no paper trail. The instructor would have been the only one who knew the source of the money, and he would have been sworn to secrecy. The kids in the program would have had no idea that their dojo was being paid for by the king of rock and roll. They were just kids learning how to bow, how to stand, how to block, and how to find their center, all thanks to a man they only knew from the radio. This story highlights a different side of Elvis's philanthropy. It's not just about solving an immediate problem like hunger or housing. It's about a long-term investment in character, It's preventative. It's about giving young people the tools to build a better life for themselves. This is a more thoughtful, more structured form of giving than his usual spontaneous acts. It suggests a man who was thinking about the root causes of struggle, not just the symptoms. Is it true? Did Elvis really create a secret pipeline of funding to a small unknown karate school? Are there men in Memphis today, now in their 50s or 60s, who credit their success in life to the discipline they learned in a dojo, never knowing their tuition was paid by their hometown hero? And did Master Ree, who passed away in 2000, take the secret of the King's Dojo with him to the grave? Number 12, did he secretly buy out a movie theater for underprivileged children? This is a story that has the warm glow of a Hollywood movie, which is fitting. The legend says that on a number of occasions during the 1960s, Elvis would secretly buy out an entire movie theater in Memphis for a day. And he would then arrange with a local church or charity to have the theater filled with underprivileged children. You know, they would get to see a double feature, and each child would be given unlimited popcorn, candy, and soda. The theater staff were paid for their time, plus a huge tip and sworn to secrecy. The kids were just told that an anonymous donor wanted them to have a special day. Often, the movies shown were his own. There's a sweet, almost melancholy poetry to this idea. Elvis, who was growing to resent the bland, formulaic movies he was forced to make, would use those same movies to bring a few hours of pure, uncomplicated joy to children. It was a way of redeeming his own creative frustrations. The films might not have been art, but they could be a vehicle for kindness. The context of his life in the 60s makes this story very plausible. He was living in Los Angeles for much of the year, making 3 movies a year on average. It was a grind, but he would return to Memphis between films, and Graceland was his sanctuary. These rumored movie days would have taken place during these breaks. They would have been a way for him to reconnect with his community and do something good, far away from the pressures of Hollywood. Well, Elvis loved movies. As a poor kid in Memphis, the local cinema was a palace of dreams, a cheap and magical escape. He understood the power of sitting in a dark theater and being transported to another world. To give that experience to children who couldn't afford a movie ticket would be a very personal act of charity. It's not just about the movie, it's about the whole experience, the big screen, the comfy seats, the junk food. It's about feeling special for a day. This kind of grand theatrical gesture is very much in line with his personality. He was a showman even in his private life. Renting out an entire amusement park, Libertyland, for his friends and family to enjoy overnight was a well-documented habit. He did it multiple times. Renting out a movie theater is a similar, if smaller scale, version of the same impulse. He loved creating moments of overwhelming joy and surprise for people. The logistics would have been simple enough for his organization to handle. A call from one of his men, like Joe Esposito or Lamar Fique, to a theater manager would be all it took. The payment would be in cash. The charities involved would be asked to respect the donor's anonymity. In a pre-internet, pre-social media age, a secret like this could easily be kept. The only people who knew were a handful of adults who had no reason to talk. This story survives through word of mouth, often from people who say they were one of the children at these events. They remember a magical day at the movies as a child, a day that came out of nowhere, and only later in life did they hear the rumors that Elvis was behind it. There's no way to prove it, of course. Memories are fallible, but the consistency of the stories from different people describing similar events at different theaters over the years is compelling. Is this just a romanticized urban legend, a story that's too good to be true? Or did hundreds of kids in Memphis get a perfect day at the movies, a brief escape from hardship, paid for by the very star they might have been watching on the screen? Could old theater ledgers or charity records hold a cryptic entry about a special children's event paid for by a Mr. the 10th? Number 11 was he the anonymous donor who saved a local animal shelter. Elvis's love for animals was legendary. Throughout his life, he surrounded himself with a menagerie of pets at Graceland. He had dogs, horses, chickens, and even a chimpanzee named Scatter. His love for animals was pure and uncomplicated. So it's no surprise that one of the most enduring unconfirmed stories about his philanthropy involves an animal shelter. The story, as it's usually told, centers on a small, independent animal shelter in the Memphis area in the early 1970s. The shelter was on the brink of collapse. It was overwhelmed with stray and abandoned animals, and it lacked the funds to feed them, provide medical care, or maintain the facility. They put out a desperate plea for donations in the local newspaper. A few days later, a representative from the shelter received a call to meet with a local lawyer. At the meeting, the lawyer presented them with a cashier's check for an amount so large it would not only solve their immediate problems but also secure their operations for years to come. The lawyer explained the money came from a client who was a great animal lover and who insisted on remaining completely anonymous. The shelter was saved. The animals were cared for, but the identity of the benefactor remained a mystery. The rumor, of course, is that it was Elvis. This story aligns perfectly with his known behavior. He didn't just love his own animals. He often gave animals as gifts. He bought horses for his friends and family. Well, he once gave a puppy to a young fan. His connection to animals seemed to be a way for him to access a simple, loyal love that was often missing in his human relationships. Animals didn't want anything from him except affection. They didn't care that he was a superstar. The timing in the early 70s is also key. This was post-comeback special Elvis. He was back on top, performing in Las Vegas, flush with cash, but also increasingly isolated. His acts of generosity became more frequent and sometimes more extravagant during this period. It was as if he was trying to use his money to forge connections and do good in a world he could no longer easily be a part of. Saving an animal shelter would be a deeply satisfying act for him. It's a direct, immediate, and positive impact. It's not complicated. Animals are suffering, money can stop that suffering. For a man whose life was a tangle of complications, from his career and his finances to his health and his relationships, the simplicity of this kind of charity would have been very appealing. As with the other stories, the anonymity is the crucial element. Colonel Parker would have loved the publicity Elvis saves puppies. It would have been a PR goldmine, but for Elvis, this would have been personal. It wasn't about his image, it was about the animals. By keeping it secret, he kept the act pure. It was a transaction between him and his conscience, a quiet nod to his love for creatures that couldn't say thank you. The evidence is, once again, purely circumstantial. There are no financial records linking Elvis to any specific shelter. But the story has been told and retold by people involved in the Memphis animal rescue community for decades. They point to a specific shelter that had a mysterious, near-miraculous turnaround in its fortunes around 1972. The story became a piece of local folklore, an accepted truth without proof. Could this be true? Did Elvis write a check that saved the lives of hundreds, if not thousands, of abandoned animals in his hometown? Is it possible that the financial records of a Memphis law firm from the 1970s contain a ledger entry that would solve this mystery once and for all? And how many other, smaller acts of kindness toward animals, paying a stranger's vet bill, for instance, might he have performed completely under the radar? Number 10, did he create a secret scholarship for a trade school? This unconfirmed story is a tribute to Elvis's working-class roots. The legend claims that Elvis, who worked as a truck driver for Crown Electric Company before he became famous, secretly funded a full scholarship program at a vocational school in Memphis. The scholarships were not for aspiring musicians or actors. They were for young people learning practical trades, electricians, auto mechanics, and plumbers. The program was supposedly called the Gladys Presley Memorial Scholarship, but only in the private records of the school's administrator. Publicly, it was simply an anonymous grant. The scholarship would be awarded each year to a handful of students from low-income backgrounds who showed aptitude and a strong work ethic. It would cover their tuition, tools, and books, giving them a shot at a stable, respectable career. This story is deeply rooted in Elvis's own past and his family's values. The Presley family was part of the working poor. Vernon Presley worked a series of odd jobs, and Gladys worked at a garment factory. They understood the value of a skilled trade. It meant security. It meant you could always find work and provide for your family. For all his fame and fortune, Elvis never lost his respect for that kind of work. He was famously fascinated by police work and was an honorary officer in several departments. He also loved cars and was knowledgeable about mechanics. A scholarship for the trades, named privately for his mother, would be a perfect tribute. It honored the world she came from. It provided the kind of practical help that the Presleys themselves would have desperately needed when Elvis was a young man. It wasn't a glamorous charity, but it was a profoundly useful one. It was about giving young men and women a tangible skill, a path to a steady paycheck, and a dignified life. The story suggests the scholarship was set up in the late 1960s and managed through a trusted financial advisor. The selection process was handled quietly by the school. The students who received the aid were simply told it came from a local foundation that wished to support the trades. They never knew their benefactor was the most famous entertainer on the planet. This kind of giving is less about a grand gesture and more about building a legacy. It's a structured, long-term philanthropic effort. It's a way of planting a tree whose shade you'll never sit in. This suggests a level of thoughtful planning that is often overlooked in the stories of his more impulsive generosity. It shows a man thinking about the future, about creating opportunities that would last beyond a single act of kindness. This rumor is harder to substantiate than others because educational institutions have strict privacy rules. Even if the scholarship existed, the school would be unlikely to ever reveal the donor's name. The story is kept alive by whispers in the trade community in Memphis. An older mechanic might tell a story about how his schooling was paid for by a mysterious grant and how he always heard that Elvis was behind it. It's a powerful idea. Elvis, the symbol of escapist fantasy and unimaginable wealth, quietly investing in the most grounded, practical, and unglamorous of professions. It's his way of saying that the work of an electrician or a plumber is just as valuable and worthy of support as the work of an artist. It's a nod to his own past, to the life he would have lived if that first record at Sun had gone nowhere. So, are there skilled tradespeople across the Mid-South who built their careers on a foundation provided by Elvis Presley? Did he create a quiet engine of opportunity for the working class of his city, a secret tribute to his mother's memory? And could a clue be buried deep in the archives of a Memphis vocational school in a file simply marked anonymous donor? Number 9. Did he pay for the restoration of a historic Memphis church? Elvis's connection to gospel music was the bedrock of his entire musical identity. It was the first music he loved, the music he sang with his family, the music he returned to throughout his life for comfort and inspiration. He won all 3 of his Grammy Awards for gospel recordings. So it's fitting that one of the most powerful, unconfirmed stories about his generosity involves a church. The legend says that a historic African-American church in Memphis, a church known for its incredible gospel choir, was nearly destroyed by a fire in the late 1960s. The congregation was devastated. They were a small, working-class community and had no way to raise the enormous amount of money needed to rebuild. Just as they were about to give up hope, a local minister who was known to be an acquaintance of Elvis's received a visit. One of Elvis's men delivered a briefcase full of cash enough to cover the entire cost of the restoration. The instructions were clear: this was a gift from God, and no one should ever know the human source. This story is compelling for several reasons. First, it taps into Elvis's deep and genuine love for gospel music, particularly the style and spirit of black gospel. As a teenager, he would sometimes sneak into the back of black churches just to hear the music. He was profoundly influenced by artists like Sister Rosetta Tharpe. The book, The Gospel, According to Elvis by Kurt Wolff, details how this music was not just a professional category for him, but a personal spiritual practice. Helping to save a source of that powerful music would have been a deeply meaningful act for him. Second, it reflects a side of Elvis that has often ignored: his quiet, personal efforts to bridge the racial divide in a segregated city. While his public record on civil rights is complex and debated, stories like this suggest a man who, on a personal level, respected and valued the black community and its culture. A secret donation to a black church, with no possibility of personal gain or publicity, would be a powerful, sincere gesture of solidarity. It would be an act of faith, not politics. The use of cash in a briefcase is a classic detail of Elvis folklore. He operated in a cash economy. It was direct, it was untraceable, and it was final. It also adds a layer of drama and secrecy to the story, making it sound like something out of a movie. This rumor is one of the most whispered and least documented of all. The very nature of the alleged transaction cash, no receipts, a vow of silency, makes it impossible to prove. The story lives on in the oral history of the specific church's congregation. The older members will tell you that the miraculous, unexplained funds that appeared after the fire were a gift from the king, and they have no doubt about it. It's a story about more than just a building. It's about preserving a cultural and spiritual home. It's about honoring the roots of his own art. For Elvis, a man who built a kingdom on the foundation of black music, this would have been a way of paying a debt, not with public acknowledgement, but with a quiet, powerful act of support. But without a witness or a confession, can we ever know for sure? Did Elvis Presley use his fortune to save a piece of Memphis's spiritual and musical soul? Is there a beautifully restored church in Memphis that stands today as a silent, secret monument to his private faith? And did the minister who received the gift take the king's secret with him to his final resting place? Number 8, was there a yearly Christmas in July for a struggling family? Everyone knows Elvis loved Christmas. He kept the Christmas decorations up at Graceland for months. His Christmas albums are perennial bestsellers, but one unconfirmed story suggests his love for the holiday extended to a strange and beautiful secret ritual. The story goes that every summer Elvis would choose one family in the Memphis area who was going through a particularly hard time. He would get their information through a minister or a friend, then he would orchestrate a Christmas in July for them. One day, a truck would pull up to their house. It would be filled with everything they could possibly need and want. There would be new clothes and shoes for the entire family, a new refrigerator stocked with food, fun new furniture, and, of course, toys for the children, bicycles, dolls, everything a kid could dream of. A man would hand them an envelope with enough cash to pay their bills for months. He would simply say, "A friend wanted you to have an early Christmas," and then he would be gone. This story is so quintessentially Elvis. It's extravagant, theatrical, and deeply kind. It combines his love for Christmas with his impulsive, overwhelming style of giving. Why Christmas in July? Because it was unexpected. A gift in December is part of a tradition. A gift in the middle of the summer is a miracle. It's a moment of pure, unadulterated surprise and joy. It's exactly the kind of emotional impact Elvis loved to create. The source of this rumor is, like the others, anecdotal. It comes from second and third hand accounts. Someone knows someone whose grandmother's family was chosen one year. The details are always the same: the sudden arrival of the truck, the overwhelming amount of gifts, the envelope of cash, and the complete anonymity of the giver. This type of giving speaks to Elvis's own memories of a childhood Christmas defined by poverty. There are famous stories about the year he got his first guitar because his family couldn't afford the bicycle he really wanted. He knew the feeling of a child's holiday wish going unfulfilled. This Christmas in July would be his way of ensuring that, for at least one family each year, every wish would be granted and then some. It was also a way for him to play Santa Claus, a role he was perfectly suited for. In the 1970s, as his world became smaller and more confined to Graceland and Las Vegas, he was a man who had everything but was often deeply unhappy. Creating these moments of pure, explosive happiness for others might have been a way to fight his own demons. It was a way to feel a powerful, positive emotion, even if it was vicariously. The logistics would have been handled by his inner circle, the Memphis Mafia. They were used to these kinds of missions. Elvis would get an idea and they would be dispatched to make it happen, often with a huge wad of cash and vague instructions. Buying out a department store's worth of goods and delivering them to a surprised family would have been just another day at the office for them. This story is a piece of modern folklore. It has the structure of a fairy tale. The struggling family, the magical benefactor, the happy ending. It's possible that it's just that a story created to capture the essence of his known generosity. But it's also possible that it happened, maybe not every year, but once or twice. An impulse he had that created a legend. Is this story just a beautiful myth? Or are there families who experienced a summer miracle, a tidal wave of generosity that changed their lives? Did Elvis use the symbol of his favorite holiday to deliver hope in the most unexpected way? And how many other spontaneous theatrical acts of giving, too small or too strange to become legends, has the world never heard about? Number 7, did he quietly cover the funeral costs for a fan? This story is one of the most poignant and personal of all the unconfirmed legends. It claims that on at least one occasion, Elvis learned of the death of a devoted, longtime fan who came from a poor family. The family was struggling to afford a proper funeral. When Elvis heard about this, he was deeply moved. He contacted a local funeral home and arranged to pay for everything: the casket, the service, the burial plot, with the strict instruction that the family was never to be told who the benefactor was. They were simply to be told that the expenses had been taken care of. This act, if true, reveals a different dimension of his relationship with his fans. Though publicly, that relationship was about screams, flashbulbs, and adoration, it was a chaotic, often impersonal connection to a faceless crowd. But this story suggests that he felt a deep personal sense of responsibility for the people who loved his music. He understood that their devotion was the source of his success, and he felt a genuine connection to them. The source of this story is hard to pin down. It's often told as a friend of a friend account from someone who worked at a Memphis funeral home in the 1960s or 70s. The details are always sparse, the fan's name is never known, but the core of the story remains the same: Elvis, hearing of a fan's death and their family's financial struggle, and stepping in to provide a dignified final farewell. The context of his life makes this story feel true. Elvis was a man who felt things deeply. He was intensely loyal to his friends and family. He was also haunted by death, especially after losing his mother at a young age. He understood the pain of grief and the importance of honoring the dead. The funeral for his own mother was a huge, elaborate affair, a testament to his love and his newfound wealth. He knew what a proper burial meant. For him to extend this same consideration to a fan, a stranger who had supported him from afar, is a profound statement of empathy. It's an acknowledgement that the bond between an artist and a fan is a real human connection, not just a commercial transaction. The anonymity of the act is once again key. A public donation to the fan's family would have been seen as a publicity stunt. It would have turned the family's private grief into a media spectacle. By doing it secretly, Elvis preserved the dignity of the family and the purity of the act. It wasn't about him, it was about honoring a life and easing a burden for a grieving family. It was an act of quiet compassion. This type of story is, by its very nature, almost impossible to verify. Funeral homes are bound by confidentiality. The family in question would have no idea who their benefactor was. The only person who could confirm the story would be the funeral director who took the call, and that person is likely long gone. But the story endures because it speaks to a truth about Elvis that his fans have always believed, that underneath the superstar persona, he was a good, kind-hearted country boy who never lost his sense of decency and compassion. It's a story that confirms their faith in the man, not just the legend. So, did Elvis Presley, the biggest star in the world, take the time to concern himself with the final arrangements of a humble fan? Is there a gravesite in a Memphis cemetery that was paid for by the king? A final act of generosity to someone who loved him? And if he did it once, did he do it other times, creating a small, secret ministry of providing comfort to the grieving? Number 6, did he make a large anonymous donation to a Native American reservation? Elvis was proud of his family heritage, which included Cherokee ancestry through his mother's line. While it was a distant connection, it was something he acknowledged and felt was a part of him. A little known but powerful rumor claims that he honored this heritage with a significant anonymous donation to a struggling Native American reservation in the late 1960s or early 1970s. The story goes that Elvis read an article or saw a television news report about the extreme poverty and poor living conditions on a specific reservation. Some versions of the story say it was in Oklahoma or Arizona. He was reportedly shocked and angered by the neglect and hardship the people were facing. In response, he had one of his financial managers arrange a large wire transfer to the tribal council or a related charity. The donation came from a holding company or a foundation with a generic name, making its source untraceable. The money was to be used for infrastructure, like clean water or for a new school or community health clinic. This story is significant because it connects his philanthropy to his own identity and to a major social issue of the time. The late 1960s and early 70s saw the rise of the American Indian movement and a new national awareness of the plight of Native Americans. If Elvis made this donation, it would show him to be not just a generous man, but a socially aware one, using his wealth to address a systemic injustice that he felt a personal connection to. His Cherokee heritage came from his great-great-great-grandmother, Mourning Dove White. While he wasn't deeply involved in Native American culture, it was a known part of his family story. For a man who was so devoted to the memory of his mother, honoring her ancestors in this way would have been a deeply meaningful act. It was a way of connecting with a part of his own roots, a part that was far removed from the glitz and glamour of his daily life. The anonymity of the act would have been essential. Any public involvement by Elvis Presley in a politically charged issue like Native American rights would have been a massive story. It would have drawn praise from some and criticism from others. Colonel Parker would have likely been against it, as he always tried to keep Elvis as apolitical and controversy-free as possible. A secret donation was a way for Elvis to act on his conscience without creating a political firestorm. It was a purely humanitarian gesture, not a political statement. The evidence for this story is thinner than for many of the others. It exists mostly as a rumor among Elvis historians and a few activists from that era who recall a mysterious, large donation that helped a specific community at a critical time. Tracing a wire transfer from 50 years ago, especially one designed to be anonymous, is nearly impossible. But the story fits his profile. It combines his pattern of reading about a problem and wanting to solve it immediately with a personal historical connection. It also shows a man who, despite his isolation, was still watching the world and was capable of being moved to action by the suffering of others. It expands the scope of his rumored philanthropy beyond Memphis, taking it to a national level. Did Elvis feel a kinship with his distant Native American ancestors and act on it with a massive, secret gift? Could the records of a tribal council or a national Native American charity from that era hold the key to this story? And if it's true, what kind of impact did that money have on a community? And how many lives were changed by an act of quiet solidarity from a man they only knew as a distant icon? Number 5. Did he secretly fund a local soup kitchen for years? This rumor is one of the most fundamental. It's not about grand gestures or luxury items. It's about the most basic human need, food. The story asserts that for several years in the 1970s, Elvis Presley was the secret, primary financial backer of a soup kitchen in a poor neighborhood of Memphis. He didn't just make a one-time donation, he provided a steady monthly stream of cash that kept the doors open, bought the food, and paid the bills. According to the legend, the arrangement was handled by a single trusted member of his entourage. Once a month, this person would deliver a plain envelope containing a large amount of cash to the director of the soup kitchen. There was no paperwork, no acknowledgement, no thank you letters. It was a simple, silent transaction to ensure that the city's poorest residents would have at least one hot meal a day. This story resonates so strongly because it cuts right to the heart of Elvis's own childhood. The Presleys often struggled with food insecurity. They relied on the charity of neighbors and government assistance. Elvis knew what true hunger felt like. The memory of that kind of poverty is something that never leaves a person, no matter how much wealth they accumulate. For him to secretly fund a soup kitchen would be the most direct way of fighting the battle he and his family once faced. The director of the soup kitchen was the only person who knew where the money came from, and they were sworn to absolute secrecy. The volunteers, the staff, and the people being fed had no idea that their meals were being provided by the king of rock and roll. He was simply their anonymous angel. This rumor suggests a more sustained and organized approach to his charity. It wasn't just a one-off emotional impulse, it was a commitment. A monthly payment requires planning and consistency. It indicates that he was thinking about the ongoing needs of his community, not just reacting to a single sad story in the newspaper. This was a program, not just a present. The 1970s, when this was said to have happened, was a period of great turmoil for Elvis personally. He was dealing with divorce, health problems, and the pressures of constant touring. Supporting a soup kitchen, an enterprise of simple, direct service to others, might have been a way for him to find meaning and purpose outside of his own troubled life. It was a way to stay connected to the real-world struggles of the city he loved, even as his own world became increasingly strange and isolated. As with the other stories, there is no hard proof. A cash-based, off-the-books operation leaves no trail. The story survives in the memories of a few social workers and church leaders from that time in Memphis. They talk about a certain soup kitchen that always seemed to have enough money, even when others were struggling thanks to a mysterious silent partner. You know, it's a humble story. It's not as glamorous as buying Cadillacs or as dramatic as saving a church, but in many ways it's the most powerful. It's about the quiet, daily work of feeding the hungry. It's Elvis, the global icon, making sure that a few dozen of his poorest neighbors in Memphis wouldn't have to go to bed hungry. It's the most basic act of human decency performed in secret. Did Elvis ensure that the hungry people of his city were fed, day after day, year after year? How many thousands of meals were served because of his secret monthly envelopes of cash? And is it possible that a simple handwritten note of thanks from the soup kitchen's director, a note that was never meant to be kept, still exists somewhere in the vast archives of Graceland? Number 4, did he buy a new team bus for a minor league baseball team? Elvis was a huge sports fan. He loved football and would organize energetic, full-contact games with his friends at Graceland. He was also a fan of baseball. This unconfirmed story combines his love of sports with his habit of extravagant gift-giving. The legend says that Elvis, a fan of the Memphis Blues, a minor league baseball team, bought them a brand new, state-of-the-art team bus in the early 1970s. The story goes that he heard the team was traveling to away games in an old, run-down bus that was constantly breaking down. For a professional sports team, even in the minor leagues, this was embarrassing and unprofessional. Elvis, feeling a sense of civic pride and having a soft spot for the underdog athletes, decided to fix the problem. He anonymously purchased a top-of-the-line bus, had it painted in the team's colors, and had it delivered to the stadium. The team management and the players were stunned. They were told the bus was a gift from a local businessman and baseball fan who wanted to support the home team. No one ever officially knew the donor was Elvis. This story is fun and it's entirely believable. It fits his pattern of identifying a specific, tangible need and solving it with an overwhelming, almost absurdly generous gesture. He didn't just donate money for repairs, he bought them a whole new bus. That was his style, go big. His connection to the Memphis Blues, also known as the Chicks, at different times was real. He was occasionally spotted at their games at the old Tim McCarver Stadium. For him, a local sports team was part of the fabric of the community. Supporting them was a way of supporting Memphis. This act would have been pure fun for him. It's a joyful, positive kind of gift. It's about helping a group of young, struggling athletes chase their dream. Elvis, who had achieved the ultimate dream, would have appreciated their hard work and dedication. Like it was a gift from one performer to another, a gesture of respect for their grind. The anonymity here might have served a different purpose. While he would have avoided a media circus, he also would have avoided putting pressure on the team. If it were known that Elvis Presley gave them a bus, it would have created a huge story. Every game would have been about Elvis, not about the players. By staying in the shadows, he let the gift be about the team, not about him. Like so many of these stories, the proof is elusive. The team's ownership has changed hands many times, and records from that era would be long gone. The story is kept alive by former players and old-time Memphis sports reporters who tell the tale of the mystery bus that appeared one day. They say everyone knew it was from Elvis, but no one could ever prove it. It became part of the team's folklore. It's a story that shows a lighter side of his secret philanthropy. It's not about life or death situations like hunger or illness. It's about community spirit, pride, and the love of the game. It's Elvis the fan, using his superstar wealth to give his local team a big league boost. Is this just a great sports legend, or did a bus full of minor league ballplayers travel the roads of the South in a luxury coach paid for by the king? Could a photograph of this mysterious unbranded bus exist in a player's personal scrapbook? And if he did this for the baseball team, did he ever make similar anonymous gifts to other local sports programs like high school football teams? Number 3, did he pay for a life-saving operation for a stranger's child? This story is perhaps the most emotionally powerful and the most directly connected to his known public philanthropy. The legend says that Elvis read a human interest story in the newspaper about a local family whose child was suffering from a rare medical condition. The child needed a complex, expensive surgery to survive, and the family had no way to pay for it. They were trying to raise funds, but they were falling desperately short. Elvis was so moved by the story that he immediately and anonymously paid the entire hospital bill. The family was contacted by the hospital administration and told that a benefactor had covered all the costs for the surgery and the recovery. The benefactor's identity was to be kept strictly confidential. The family never knew that the man who saved their child's life was Elvis Presley. This story is a private version of his public support for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. His work for St. Jude is one of the most celebrated parts of his legacy. He was one of the hospital's first and most important celebrity champions. He believed deeply in its mission that no child should be denied treatment based on race, religion, or a family's ability to pay. So the idea that he would extend this same principle to a specific child he read about in the paper is not just plausible, it's almost a certainty. It is perfectly aligned with his deepest held charitable values. If he believed in helping all children through St. Jude, it makes perfect sense that he would also be moved to help one specific child whose story came across his path. This is Elvis acting not as a celebrity spokesman, but as a private citizen, a man with the means to solve an impossible problem for a desperate family. The story highlights the immense power he wielded. With a single phone call, he could literally save a life. Using that power secretly would have been a profoundly humbling and grounding experience for a man who lived such an unreal existence. The newspaper was his window to the world. Like, as his fame grew, he became more and more isolated. He couldn't just go out and meet people. The daily paper was one of his primary sources of information about the lives of ordinary people in his city. It's a recurring theme in these legends: Elvis sitting in Graceland, reading the paper, finding someone in need, and dispatching help. The proof for this story is, by its nature, impossible to find. Medical records are confidential. At hospital, billing is private. The family would have no proof, only a story about a miracle. The hospital would have honored the donor's request for anonymity. The only way the story could survive is if a hospital administrator or a doctor told someone in confidence, and the story spread from there. It's a story that shows the immense compassion at the core of his character. He was a father himself, and his love for his daughter, Lisa Marie, was absolute. The thought of a child suffering and a family feeling helpless would have struck a deep chord with him. To be able to lift that burden to give a child a future would have been the most meaningful use of his money imaginable. Is this story the secret, personal expression of his public work for St. Jude? How many children's lives might have been saved by these quiet, anonymous interventions? And is it possible that somewhere out there is an adult who owes their very life to Elvis Presley and has never known it? Number 2, did he secretly buy all the inventory of a closing downtown store? This story is one of the most unusual and speaks to Elvis's complex relationship with his own wealth and the changing city of Memphis. The legend says that in the mid-1970s, a small family-owned department store in downtown Memphis was going out of business. It was an old-fashioned kind of place that had been around for decades, but couldn't compete with the new suburban malls. The elderly owners were facing financial ruin, left with a store full of inventory they couldn't sell. Elvis, who had fond memories of shopping in these kinds of stores as a young man with his mother, heard about their plan. In a single grand gesture, he secretly bought the entire remaining inventory of the store. He paid them a fair price in cash for everything: clothes, furniture, hardware, all of it. He then had all the goods donated to local charities like the Salvation Army and Goodwill. This act accomplished 3 things at once. First, it saved the elderly couple from bankruptcy, allowing them to retire with dignity. Second, it provided a massive influx of useful goods to the city's charities. Third, it was a quiet protest against the decline of the old downtown Memphis he remembered and loved. This story is powerful because it's not just about helping one person, it's about honoring a way of life that was disappearing. Elvis was intensely nostalgic. Graceland itself is a monument to a certain time and style. He often seemed to be trying to freeze time, to hold on to the things he loved. The closing of an old downtown store would have been a symbol of a world that was fading away. His gesture was a way of giving that world a dignified end. The logistics of such an operation would have been complex. It would have required his team to coordinate the purchase, the packing, and the distribution of an entire store's worth of merchandise. But it was exactly the kind of over-the-top, logistically challenging mission that Elvis seemed to enjoy creating for his entourage. The story has a strong ring of truth because of his documented history of spontaneous, large-scale purchases. He was famous for buying out jewelry stores to give gifts to his friends and even strangers. Buying out an entire department store is just taking that same impulse to its logical and most charitable conclusion. This rumor survives in the collective memory of the Memphis business community. People who worked downtown in that era tell the story of the store that was miraculously saved at the last minute and how all their stock just vanished overnight, sent to charity. The whispers always said that Elvis was behind it, that it was his way of saying goodbye to a piece of his city's past. It's a story about economic justice, civic pride, and personal nostalgia, all rolled into one. It shows Elvis using his money not just for personal charity, but for a kind of community preservation. He was acting as the secret guardian of his city's soul. Did Elvis really write a final, happy chapter for a classic Memphis business? How many needy families in Memphis received clothes, furniture, and household goods that year, without knowing they came from the king's final tribute to the downtown of his youth? And could a single old bill of sale tucked away in a box of the family's papers be the one piece of evidence that could prove this incredible story? Number 1. Did he keep a destitute war? Hero on a private pension. This final story is perhaps the most moving and the one that best encapsulates all the themes of his secret philanthropy. His respect for service, his empathy for the forgotten, and his desire to provide long-term, life-altering help. The legend claims that Elvis befriended an elderly man in Memphis who was a highly decorated hero from World War I or II, but who was living in extreme poverty, forgotten and struggling to survive. Elvis was so outraged and saddened by this that he decided to take care of the man for the rest of his life. He didn't just give him a one-time gift, he set up a secret private pension for him. Every month, one of Elvis's most trusted associates would visit the man and give him a cash allowance of enough to live comfortably and with dignity. This continued for years, until the man passed away. This was not a public relations stunt. No one knew. It was a private, solemn commitment from one veteran to another. And Elvis, who served in peacetime, had a profound respect for those who had seen combat. To see a man who had sacrificed so much for his country be left with nothing would have violated his deepest sense of fairness and patriotism. This story goes beyond simple charity. It's about restoring a man's honor. It's about telling him that his service was not forgotten. The monthly visits from Elvis's associate would have also provided companionship for a lonely man. You know, it was a human connection, not just a financial transaction. This legend is the hardest to prove of all. It involves only a handful of people, all of whom would have been sworn to secrecy. The hero himself may not have even known the identity of his benefactor, only that a kind friend was looking out for him. The story is passed down as a piece of Memphis Mafia lore, a tale told by the inner circle to illustrate the true character of the man they worked for. If true, it is the ultimate expression of Elvis's secret giving. It was sustained, personal, and profoundly respectful. It was a quiet, one-man social safety net. It was a way of correcting a great injustice that society had allowed to happen. He was using his kingly fortune to care for a forgotten soldier. This story embodies the central question about Elvis's secret philanthropy. We know about the cars and the public donations, but these unconfirmed stories suggest a vast, hidden world of kindness. They paint a portrait of a man who was engaged in a lifelong, secret war against poverty, loneliness, and injustice, fighting it one person at a time with a quiet phone call, an envelope of cash, a secret scholarship, or a private pension. The legend of his generosity may be even bigger than the legend of his fame. Is this story the masterpiece of his secret charity, a multi-year commitment to one forgotten hero? Who was this man, and what is his story? And ultimately, if these 17 stories and the countless others we will never hear are true, then who was the real Elvis Presley? Was the man we thought we knew just a shadow, and was his real life's work done in secret, far from the spotlight in the quiet, compassionate corners of his heart?